There we go. Decent brownie. Thank you there, Mr. Brown. Nice guy. Good looking fish. There we go. All right. Boy, I made a nice cast in there. He hit the Jack Daniels on the dropper. So I'm working this area right here. Got all kinds of limbs. Boy, he's a pretty one. Look at the spots on that guy. Thank you there, Mr. Brown. Working this nice run here. I got all kinds of limbs in front of me and I got them behind me too, so I'm keeping my cast low and really tucking it in there pretty quick with a low to high. There we go. So what I did there is I went single fly. I cut my dropper off and I just have that size 16. Thank you there, little buddy. Olive flash, or I'm sorry, I got the size 16 simple olive paragon on. Just got all these overhanging limbs. I'm keeping my cast low and really just kind of picking my spots here. Really what I want to talk about today is the mistakes that I see out there on the stream. You know, the purpose of my videos is I'm really trying to, you know, elevate people and, you know, really take you from here to here. And there's just a lot of mistakes I see out there. And these are really the 5 biggest mistakes that I see that really keeps you from elevating your game. And the first one is really 5 parts. It's just lacking the fundamentals. That's the biggest mistake I see out there is, or the first mistake I see out there, I should say, is lacking the fundamentals. And the fundamentals are A, B, C, D, and E, which is casting, line management, weight management, the ability to read the sighter, and positioning. And I did all of that at one time there. So I was just below here. I caught a couple fish and I had 2 flies on, but I noticed when I got right over here, I didn't like how my sighter was reacting. It was kind of swirling around, and I knew it's because the current was tugging on my dropper. So I took off the dropper and I just went single fly. And I moved up here and I positioned below the fish. I'm fishing upstream of me because it's very clear and it's low. I made a nice low to high, really a sidearm cast, put it in there and managed my line right away. And I saw that sighter twitch, and it's just all fundamental. So that is the number one thing, the number one mistake I see is people just lack those fundamentals. So really, you've got to start out with these core fundamentals to take your game from here to here. Whether you're a beginner, you're an intermediate, or even advanced, we can all learn something new and we can all get better. So to overcome that first mistake, which is lacking the fundamentals, I'm just gonna continue up this run here and talk about the mistakes that I see. I'm just going to grease my sighter up just a little bit because there's some areas I have to lay my sighter on the water. There we go. Now, I greased up my sighter there because I got a lot of overhanging limbs here, and I got to keep my cast low, although I was able to tuck it in. But there's a little bit of upstream wind, and laying the sighter on the water actually was really, really helpful there. But the one thing that I want to talk about, the next mistake that I see, thank you there, little buddy. The next mistake that I see is people aren't fishing upstream and back to them. So that fish right there I caught casting upstream. I laid my sighter on the water a little bit, and I'm just following it back, but I have to do it for two reasons. One, there's an upstream wind. My cast got to stay low because I have a lot of limbs behind me. So I'm just staying ahead of my sighter, but you can see I'm fishing upstream and straight back to me. And that's a big mistake that I see people do. Is the second one is you don't fish upstream and back. Most people turn perpendicular to a run and they cast up 45 degrees and then bring it right in front of them and they fish below. This water is crystal clear. It's early fall. It's the typical low, clear water that we experience, especially on the East Coast. I'm in central Pennsylvania, and you just can't do it. These fish are too spooky. You cannot get up to this run like this. And there's some depth out here actually in front of me, but you can't hover over a hole because these fish are gonna see you and they're gonna be gone. If you learn to fish in front of you and back, it's going to absolutely put more fish in the net for you. So that's the second mistake that I see a lot, is people do not fish upstream and back. And I do it a ton. And if you start to learn how to do that, you're gonna see, especially when you get into runs like this, crystal clear, lower, it was a little bit lower behind me. When you start fishing upstream and back to you, you're gonna see a big difference. We gotta do everything we can not to spook the fish. And that is definitely going to be helpful. You need to grease your sighter every 15 minutes or so, because after you lay it on the water a couple times, the paste is gonna come off. There we go. Little guy, but I had the sighter on the water, fishing straight upstream back to me. Just had a little twitch. I was staying relatively tight to it. Saw that sighter twitch. Got that little guy. There we go. Boy, there's a rock out there. I just took a couple steps up and I had made, I don't know how many casts in front of it, but once again I took a couple steps up and my bugs bottomed out in a different spot, and I got that little guy. You know, I said it before, if you're catching wild trout, even the little ones, you know, they've been in the river a while to get to 8 inches, and you can learn a lot from them. If you're catching the little ones, you'll get the big ones too, because you're doing something right. So this run is starting to shallow out. There we go. Starting to shallow out in front of me here. So this is even more important to be fishing upstream back to you. And there's no way that I could be fishing sideways to this run. There's just no way. Thought I unhooked him. Thank you there, little buddy. Thank you there, little Mr. Brown. Now my profile is really low here. I'm standing in the shadows, so I can do a little bit more of a up and across here. Still staying in front of me though. There we go. Boy, that was a... Boy, these limbs are tough. These are little guys here I'm getting, but still fun. And that was just a ever so slight twitch of the sighter. Thank you there, Mr. Brown. So the next mistake that I see is the leader formulas that people use. I really, you know, I'm nymphing here, and in my opinion, there's no other better leader formula to use than something that's extremely thin. Now, I'm using, this is straight 0.16 millimeter or 5X Pezon Michel. So it's a straight, my main leader is 5X to a 5X sighter, and the sensitivity, that it's twofold. One, it's the ultimate in sensitivity. I mean, you just see that sighter just barely, you just get this nice little bow and you just see every little slight movement. That's one thing that a thin leader does for you. And the second one, it allows you to cast lighter bugs. This is shallow water, and what happens is the thicker you use as far as a leader material, the heavier bugs that you have to use to compensate for the sag. So even 8-pound test Maxima, and that's, you know, it's kind of a sidebar here. You know, everybody's stuck on this Maxima. I'm not a fan of Maxima, and it's an old school thought here, especially in the United States. You really don't see anybody in Europe using Maxima. I personally think Maxima is great for dry fly leaders. Nymphing, it's too stiff, it coils too much, and it's not supple. So you need a supple material. That's why I like Pezon Michel. It's extremely supple. You see every little movement. So when you're using even 8-pound tests, you're gonna have sag. So especially in water like this, you have to have pinpoint accuracy. Your bugs need to land, and you need to start fishing right away. When you go to that heavier formula, if you're using lighter bugs, your bugs are gonna hit, and the first thing they're gonna do is start coming back to you. It creates drag, and you're missing really important parts of the drift, because a lot of drifts in here are very short. So if you thin out that leader, you're gonna be able to fish lighter bugs. You are going to be able to fish farther away, and your bugs are gonna stay in the strike zone. And more importantly, you're just gonna see every little subtle movement that sighter gives you. And it's still relatively cold. I mean, it's fall, it's pretty chilly outside, and these fish are not aggressive. I mean, they're just grabbing, and you're just seeing little sighter movements, and that's what that thin leader is gonna do. So move away from that old school, heavier formula. You just don't need it. I've said it a million times. That whole idea of it's hard to cast is absolutely not true at all. It's all about the rod, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But do yourself a favor. If you're straight nymphing, move to a thin leader. You gotta give it a shot. It's gonna really, really be helpful. There might be one right in this tail out here. There he is. It just looked like a really likely spot. Super skinny water. And they just love, especially this time of year below those riffles, they love to get in those shallow tail outs. Just a great area for them. Once again, that thin leader just jumped a little bit. Gave me that nice little brownie. Thank you there, Mr. Brown. So thin out that leader. Don't get stuck with that old school formula. The materials they make today are so good, and everything is designed to make you better. So I'll tell you how I got that fish there, and that was, the leader was extremely helpful to me seeing that strike. There's a big glare over there, and you probably can't see it on camera there, but thank you there, Mr. Brown. Not only is the thin leader helpful, having that whole leader thin and colored, that's another reason why I'm not a fan of Maxima. I like to see my whole leader. So my sighter, I was having a real difficult time picking it up on the water. So I looked up and I could see my yellow Pezon here, and I had this, the whole leader is supple. And I actually saw the twitch in the leader. It was probably 6 feet above the water, but that's one of the benefits of not only a thin leader, but having the whole thing colored. So that's just another tip I'll give you. Just move away from that dark leader and just your colored sighter. Make the whole thing colored. You want to be able to see the whole thing. You want to be able to see your leader throughout the entire drift. You want to see it from the rod tip all the way down to the water. And if you can't see it above the water, you can always look up and find that leader somewhere in the drift. There we go. Decent fish too. Nice fish. Super heavy current. Just put that nice upstream bend in the rod, even though it's below me. And I'm falling. I just trust the rod. I trust my tippet. I have 7X on. I'll talk about that here in a minute. Everything went well on that one, aside from me almost falling in. But it's a nice brownie right there. Nice, solid 14-incher. Thank you there, Mr. Brown. It's pretty cool. So let me just tell you about the next mistake I really see people do. Let me just tell you about that fish here for a second. So you can see that nice run right there, and you see that slack water on the other side, and he was just on the edge, hit a little bit down, maybe right of center there, and I'm standing in the shadow, so I was able to fish up and across, so I was completely fine where I was at here. But one thing is, I have a single size 16 Paragon. I got a 2/8 beat, and that's probably 2.5 feet there, and you have some nice moving water there. And not only does the thin leader help, but what also helps is my tippet size. I'm using 7X, and I have all the confidence in the world in 7X. I use it a ton. I probably use 7X more than I use anything, and that's because I can take, it's helpful taking lightly weighted bugs and getting them down to depth right away without any of the drag that's caused by the currents. The mistake that I see people make so many times is they use too heavy of tippet. I fish Montana in the summertime, caught a lot of large fish, heavy currents, and I was using 6X the whole time. So I'm not opposed to using 5X in big, heavy currents like that, but under normal conditions, 6X is great. Do not, and I talk to so many guys, they're so afraid to move away from 5X because they just think they're gonna lose that big fish. These rods are so good, and the Tippet today is so good. You can put tons of pressure on a fish with a 6X. And the big thing is, it's gonna help you get lighter bugs down the depth, because when you're using 5X, you have to use heavier bugs. So in a situation like this, I've got a single 2.8 on, 5X would be too much. I would not be able to get down the way I'd like to get down. So don't make that mistake of just saying, I can't go less than 5X, because you'll see a big difference if you just move from 5X to 6X. And you can see that fish, that was a nice chunk brownie right there. It got below me. I put a upstream bend in the rod, was able to move it up in this current, and I had no problem whatsoever. I had no worries about my tippet breaking, because once again, the rod's gonna do that work for you. You know, the last thing I want to talk about is the fifth mistake that I see is people not really understanding their rod. Not really understanding the tool for the job. This is an amazing tool, and it has awesome capabilities, and it will do everything you want it to do if you understand it. And going back to the fundamentals, one of the problems I see people do is they lob a lot, and they go out and they buy this amazing rod. This is a Thomas & Thomas 10-foot 9-inch 2.8. I love this rod, and I understand it, and I know the capabilities. I know what it can do great, and I know what it can't do great. But they buy an amazing tool, and they don't use it to its fullest capabilities. They just end up lobbing it out, and you know, honestly, if you do that, you could be sticking with your 9-foot 5 weight and lob. But if you understand what this rod can do, like for instance, this 10-foot 9-inch 2.8 is amazing for casting lighter bugs. You know, up to about a 3.0 with a dropper, it's pretty amazing. The recovery on this rod is spot on. When I start casting 3.3s, it's slower to recover, and I know that. And I'm okay with that. But most of the time when I have this rod in my hand, I know what size bugs I'm going to be using that day. And if I end up going heavier, it's no big deal. I just know my rod's a little bit slower to recover, and I know I need to slow my cast down. But these rods were built for casting. They were built to protect that light tippet. They put a deep bend in the rod, and they're awesome. If you put that deep bend in the rod, they're awesome for fighting fish, but you need to use the butt of the rod down here. So you can't Orvis pose them. You've got to lower the rod, get that deep bend, fight the big fish right here, and it's going to do an awesome job of protecting that light tippet that I really suggest you go down to. But just understand your equipment. Get out in your yard and really figure out how to use it. You know, I love the analogy of golf with EURO Nymphing all the time. I mean, if you don't understand the mechanics of the golf swing, I mean, you can go out and spend $1,000 on a set of clubs, and it's not going to make your swing any better, right? If you don't have a good fundamental swing, it doesn't matter how much you spend on clubs, it's not going to make you better. You've got to understand the mechanics of a swing, and once you do it, then you can go out and buy nicer clubs. But even the mid-priced range Euro rods are really, really good rods. So understand your equipment, understand what this rod can do, and when you do that, it's gonna make you better. Don't make the mistake of just buying a rod and going out there and just lobbing it. So I'm gonna be calling it quits here on Central PA. I hope you enjoyed this video. You know, these are the biggest, the 5 biggest mistakes I see out there. I've done a video on the top 5 things to learn, and they really are the core fundamentals that you need to know. So I hope you check out that video and learn those fundamentals. Secondly, learn to fish upstream, especially when you have this low, clear water. Don't get perpendicular to everything. If you start fishing upstream and back to you, it's definitely going to put more fish in the net. Thin out those leaders. You're going to be able to fish lighter bugs farther away. It's going to register takes a lot easier. Don't be afraid to thin it out. And go to lighter tippet. Don't let 5X or 4X be that crutch. Don't be afraid to move the 6X. Get good at it, and you'll see that it's pretty darn capable of handling some really nice fish. And lastly, really understand this rod. This is an awesome tool, but it's only awesome if you really understand it and practice with it and become proficient with it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it helped you out. If you did, I'd appreciate if you give me a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. Happy to help you out. And as always, tight lines, everybody. I'll talk to you later. Bye.